my direction and he said, "You need Christ." And I got behind that big man because I knew he was talking about me.
Good morning.
There are three big hacks in front of you.
Welcome to Slade, Kentucky, where people like to pull in right behind you and just camp out there so you can't back up. There we go. Thank you. My name's Steven, by the way. And we're going to take a little bit of a road trip today. Now that I've survived getting out of the parking lot, let's talk about Slade for a bit. Thanks to easy access from the Mountain Parkway, Slade has become a hub for just about every traveler entering the Red River Gorge. This is where people stop to get trail maps, rent cabins, ask for directions to the nearest campground, and grab a bite to eat before climbing cliffs, hiking beneath arches, and taking photos of the sandstone formations that make this place so recognizable. Tourism may define Slade today, but visitors were being drawn into this area long before the Mountain Parkway was built. In 1889, the Kentucky Union Railway established a rail line through Slade to reach the valuable timber resources found throughout these mountains. The railway soon became connected to tourism as well. In 1895, the Kentucky Union Land Company sold the railroad and 137 acres surrounding Natural Bridge to the Lexington and Eastern Railway Company. The company developed the area as a private park and began running excursion trains to it on Sundays and holidays. People were arriving by rail to enjoy Natural Bridge more than a century before Slade became the road travel hub we know today. The Louisville and Nashville Railroad purchased the Lexington and Eastern in 1912 and continued operating excursions to the park through 1925. Afterward, the railroad gave the 137-acre property to the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and the General Assembly established the Natural Bridge as a state park 100 years ago in 1926. So Slade's connection to tourism did not simply replace its railroad history. In many ways, it grew directly from it. Even the name Slade may be connected to the railroad. The local station was known at different times as McNabb and Dundee before becoming Slade, probably in honor of T.B. Slade of the Kentucky Union Railway. Slade is not our focus, though. Just up the road, we'll be turning onto Kentucky Route 77, a road that leads through a historic landmark, crosses the Red River, and carries the memory of a time when this landscape was tied more closely to timber and railroads than to weekend recreation. And if you blink, you're no longer in Slade, you're in Nada. Now, the thing about Nada is the pronunciation. I used to work a retail job in a town close by to here, and we sold postcards, Red River Gorge postcards, Natural Bridge, stuff like that. And one of the postcards was, featuring the Nada Tunnel, which we're going to be passing through in a minute. But whenever tourists or out-of-towners came into the store and they saw the postcard, their first question was, "Oh, how do I find Nada Tunnel?" And I was a teenager at the time. I worked there when I was in high school. It always aggravated me that people referred to it as Nada. But phonetically, grammatically, Nada's probably correct. But this is Eastern Kentucky. This is the 606. I always imagine Jeremy Clarkson saying that. Welcome to the 606.
Anyway, last week.
Now that I've finished sharing my unsolicited thoughts on the 606, we are officially traveling on Kentucky Route 77. At first, this may not look like a particularly unusual road. It is narrow, heavily wooded, and constantly bending around the shape of the land. There's very little shoulder, and the curves often keep the road hidden until the last moment. This is also part of what gives Kentucky 77 its character. Instead of cutting a straight path through the mountains, it follows the valleys, climbs the ridges, and works with whatever space the landscape is willing to provide. This portion of Kentucky 77 forms part of the Red River Gorge Scenic Byway. For visitors, it is one of the most recognizable routes in the gorge. For the people who live in the area, it's also a working road connecting homes and communities across Powell and Menifee counties. The road forces everyone to slow down. The lanes are narrow, visibility is limited, and there's not much room for error when another vehicle appears around a curve. On a road like this, moving slowly is not necessarily a bad thing. It gives us time to notice how quickly the surroundings change after leaving Slade. The businesses and signs begin falling behind while the trees, steep hillsides, and rock faces close in around the roadway. The modern tourism hub begins to disappear, and the landscape starts revealing the older story that brought railroads, timber companies, and road builders into these mountains in the first place. Just ahead is the feature that made this stretch of Kentucky 77 famous. It has been photographed, filmed, and posted online by almost everyone who passes through it. Naturally, I was not about to be the exception. And here's the obligatory TikTok video. Everybody who goes through Native Tunnel has to put it on TikTok. Here's hoping there's nobody coming through while I pull up. Coming out of Native Tunnel feels a little like passing through a doorway. On the other side, the road becomes more enclosed by forest, and the original purpose of the tunnel begins to make more sense. Native Tunnel was built between 1910 and 1911 for the Dana Lumber Company. Workers cut approximately 900 feet through the ridge so a narrow gauge railroad could carry timber out of the mountains. The tunnel was not built for automobiles, tourists, or scenic drives. It was built for work. At the beginning of the 20th century, these hills were valuable because of the timber growing across them. The same cliffs, steep slopes, and narrow valleys that attract visitors today made it difficult to move logs. The railroad offered a practical solution, and the tunnel allowed trains to pass directly through the ridge instead of finding a longer route around it. There is a story that the first load of logs was too large to fit through the original opening, forcing workers to enlarge the tunnel. That detail has been repeated for years, although the exact story is difficult to verify. What is certain is that the tunnel was created for trains carrying timber, not for the cars and trucks that squeeze through it now. The logging railroad did not remain in operation forever. As the timber industry changed, the tracks were eventually removed, and the tunnel took on a new purpose. The old railroad passage became part of Kentucky 77 and one of the best known entrances into the Red River Gorge. That change reflects a larger shift in how people view this landscape. The lumber company saw these mountains as a source of timber. Visitors now come here to hike, climb, camp, paddle, and photograph the scenery. The tunnel has survived both versions of that story, and it still provides a direct passage through the ridge, but the people using it and the reasons they are here have changed completely. The road ahead soon reaches the Red River, the feature that helped shape the gorge itself. Over time, the river and its tributaries cut through the sandstone, helping form the valleys, cliffs, rock shelters, and arches found throughout the area. The bridge coming into view was built in 1935. It is often called the Old Iron Bridge, although it is technically a steel Pratt through truss bridge. In this type of design, the connected steel framework above and beside the roadway helped carry the weight of the crossing. For generations, this bridge has carried residents, workers, and visitors across the Red River. It may not be as famous as Nada Tunnel, but the two structures belong together. The tunnel carries Kentucky 77 through the mountain. The bridge carries it across the river. Alright, now typically, when a person is going to the gorge, they'll get on Kentucky 77 here and they'll go on that 715. That'll take them by the Glady Visitor Center and then onto a lot of the hiking trails. But our focus is on Kentucky 77 today. As Kentucky 77 begins climbing away from the junction with Kentucky 715, the road remains completely surrounded by woods. Before long, a series of small pull-offs start appearing along the right side. There are no overlooks here, no picnic tables, and no obvious attraction visible from the road. To someone unfamiliar with this section, it may not be clear why these spaces exist or why they sometimes fill with vehicles. Most of them are used by rock climbers. Climbers park along the right side, unload their ropes, helmets, backpacks, and other equipment, then cross the road and enter into the woods on the left. The cliff line is mostly hidden behind the trees, so the climbing areas are easy to miss from inside a passing vehicle. That is part of what makes this stretch unusual. The road may appear quiet, while a surprising amount of activity is taking place just beyond the tree line. Once the climbers leave their vehicles, they disappear into the woods and make their way toward the sandstone walls above the road. Drivers need to stay alert here. Kentucky 77 is narrow, and the curves limit how far ahead anyone can see. Parked vehicles can also block the view of someone preparing to cross. A climber carrying ropes, packs, or other bulky equipment may not be able to move quickly once stepping into the roadway. The pull-offs are small, and they were never designed to handle large crowds. When only a few vehicles are present, there is usually enough room for people to park and unload. When several groups arrive at the same time, the roadside can become much tighter. The reason so many climbers come here is hidden in the woods to our left. The Red River Gorge is widely known for its sandstone cliffs, and those walls contain cracks, pockets, ledges, and overhanging sections that climbers use to make their way upward. The United States Forest Service identifies the Red River Gorge as the most popular climbing area in the Daniel Boone National Forest. Climbers come from around the world to attempt the routes on the sandstone walls of eastern Kentucky. Some visitors come to the gorge for arches, overlooks, or hiking trails. Climbers experience the landscape differently. To them, the cliff faces are not simple scenery. Each wall may contain several established routes, with each one presenting its own series of movements and challenges. Their schedule is also different from that of the average weekend visitor. Climbers may arrive before sunrise, spend most of the day away from the road, and return to their vehicles later in the afternoon or evening. Many also come during the week, when the better-known trails and overlooks may be relatively quiet. That means these pull-offs can be active at times when the rest of the gorge does not seem especially busy. The closer the season gets to fall, the more congested this hill becomes. Cooler temperatures are more comfortable for climbing, and autumn also brings hikers, campers, photographers, and people coming to see the leaves. On a busy fall weekend, nearly every available space may be occupied. Cars can be packed closely together, and people may be crossing at several different points, and drivers unfamiliar with the area may not understand why so many vehicles are parked along an otherwise wooded road. Nothing about these pull-offs looks especially important. They are simply small openings beside a narrow highway. For climbers, however, they are entrances to an entirely different side of the Red River Gorge, one that remains completely hidden from everyone passing by on the road. As the highway reaches the top of the hill, the sign ahead marks the entrance to the Frenchburg Job Corps Civilian Conservation Center. Despite the name, the campus sits several miles outside the town of Frenchburg. Its address is here on Tar Ridge Road, the local name used for this section of Kentucky 77. The center is one of the civilian conservation centers operated by the United States Forest Service. It provides young adults with education, career training, housing, meals, and opportunities to prepare for work or further education. Its location beside the Daniel Boone National Forest is especially fitting. Frenchburg Job Corps offers hands-on conservation training, including an advanced forestry technician program. Civilian conservation centers can also prepare students for work in forestry conservation and wildland firefighting. The campus covers 68 acres near the Red River Gorge, placing education and career training in the middle of a landscape where many of those skills can be put to practical use. You may have noticed the sign on the right earlier that marked the point where Kentucky 77 leaves the Daniel Boone National Forest. The forest manages more than 700,000 acres spread across 21 counties in eastern and southern Kentucky. It is not one unbroken block of land. Instead, federally managed areas are distributed across a much larger region that also contains communities, roads, farms, businesses, and privately owned property. The Red River Gorge lies within the Cumberland Ranger District, the northernmost district of the forest. That district covers portions of 8 counties and includes the Gorge, Cave Run Lake, and many of the cliffs, arches, streams, trails, and recreation sites found across this part of Kentucky. The Daniel Boone National Forest is managed for several purposes. Recreation is one of them, but it's not the only one. The Forest Service also manages wildlife habitat and water resources. Timber and mineral resources are part of that responsibility as well. Those different purposes do not always fit together neatly. Decisions about one use can affect the others. Building access can disturb wildlife habitat. Heavy recreation can damage trails and waterways. Timber management can change the appearance of the forest for years. The work involves finding a balance. The forest has to remain healthy while still providing access and resources. That balance has changed over time. During the early 20th century, the timber growing in these mountains was treated largely as a resource to be removed. The Dana Lumber Company and the railroad going through Nada Tunnel belonged to that period. Today, forest management includes a much wider set of concerns. Timber is still part of the picture, but so are erosion control, wildlife protection, water quality, recreation, and the preservation of sensitive areas. That does not mean every acre is left untouched. A national forest is not the same thing as a national park. National forests were created to be managed for multiple uses. National parks are generally managed more strictly around preservation and public enjoyment. That distinction helps explain some of what appears along roads passing through national forest land. These areas can contain trails and campgrounds. They can also contain managed timberland, utility corridors, and access roads. If you're still with us, you'll notice homes and small pieces of open ground appear wherever the hills provide enough room. In some places, the land rises almost immediately from the shoulder. In others, the ridge widens enough to allow a house, a yard, a garden, or a small field. The terrain has always shaped settlement in eastern Kentucky. Narrow valleys and creek bottoms offered water and some level ground. Ridges provided routes between places that might otherwise be separated by steep slopes and winding streams. That relationship between roads and land is easy to see along Kentucky 77. The highway does not travel in a straight line toward its destination. It rises, falls, and bends with the ridge. The route works around the same geography that has influenced travel through this region for generations. Houses appear in small groups rather than long rows. One may sit close to the pavement. Another may be set back among the trees. Driveways climb away from the highway or disappear over a rise. The placement of each property depends heavily on the ground beneath it. A wider section of land may provide enough room for a house and a yard. A steeper section may remain wooded because building there would require far more work. A few barns and small fields also appear along the way. They are mixed among homes rather than forming one large agricultural district. That gives the area the appearance of a rural neighborhood spread across the hills. Churches also appear beside the road. In communities like these, a church is often more than a building used for Sunday worship. It can serve as a familiar gathering place and a landmark people use when giving directions. A road may be described by the church beside it, the family that once lived near a curve, or a building that stood on top of a knob years ago. Those local reference points can remain in use long after maps and official road signs have changed. Kentucky 77 connects all of those places. It provides a direct route between the homes and side roads scattered along this part of Menifee County. The highway may appear quiet right now, but it carries the ordinary movement of daily life. People use it to reach work, church, stores, appointments, and neighboring communities. Mail carriers, delivery drivers, utility crews, and emergency vehicles all depend on the same narrow road. In a rural area, a state-maintained route provides an important connection to properties that may sit far from a larger highway. A road does not have to be crowded to be useful. Kentucky Route 77 covers a little more than 14 miles from beginning to end. It starts near Slade at the junction of Kentucky 11 and Kentucky 15, crosses from Powell County into Menifee County, and ends shortly ahead. That may not sound like much distance, but few roads of this length contain so many distinct chapters. Kentucky 77 begins beside a community shaped by the railroad. It passes through a tunnel built for the timber industry, crosses the Red River on a steel bridge, and continues north across the higher ground of Menifee County. There are roads all across these old hills that most people know only by one landmark or one familiar stretch. Kentucky 77 is a reminder that the road beyond the landmark usually has a story too. The pavement continues beyond this intersection ahead, but Kentucky Route 77 does not. At US 460, the road we have followed from Slade officially comes to an end.
At the next stop sign, turn right. At the stop sign, turn right onto US 460 East.
This brings us to the end of Route 77.